Hi, Stefano. Lovely to chat to you.
Hi, Georgie. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad. Surviving, getting on by. How about
Nice
you?
to see you.
Yeah, nice to see you too. I wanted to chat to you today because couture has been particularly interesting this season, and I know it's not something that us at Tomorrow would normally chinwag about, but the whole couture season has been very modern, lots of technology, lots of inclusivity, and those things are something that us at Tomorrow are very keen on. We're very interested in. So I wanted to pick your brain about couture and the way it's going and whether we think it's going in the right way or how we feel about it. So let's start with kind of the running favorite, which is Iris, because to me, she's always a beacon of modernity and always future thinking and always got incredible technology. So she's always on the schedule, just being phenomenal in everything she does. But this season, I think she was kind of above and beyond. What did you think?
Well, you got me on something very, very important to me. Aris is a friend. We've been, working together for a few years in the past. We're trying to help and support her development as a business of top of, being form of art. I just believe she's one of a kind, one in a generation. The paradigm of couture have changed essentially when Iris started showing in Paris. At the beginning, I do remember there were a little attention, a little bit of weird attitude towards these science-infused fabrics and those ethereal and transcendental forms she's always been championing. But little by little, she was even consistent in her messaging, and both press and the overall industry came closer to her. She's in few words, in my honest opinion, a genius.
Yeah.
She's the only one I know that starts the collection from a scientific development. It's not unusual that her collaborators are scientists or architects or engineers. She always describes the relationship between the planet, the evolvement of many form of life into the alive form and shape of a dress. In this case, as you know, it was about the evolution of fungi and how they make everything else looking different if you understand the perspective. So I go with you. She's a game changer.
Yeah, she's just spectacular. I think she's always been setting the precedent, but I think in this couture, it's almost like everyone's trying to match her now, because we saw kind of AZ Factory Albert Abaz's debut, and he's looking into new technologies, fabrics that kind of shift with the body. And obviously it's not on the same parallels as Iris, who's, as you said, it's like a science lab, her couturier, it's on atelier, sorry. It's honestly incredible, but it's really interesting to see this couture that so many people are trying to create newness. And it's something that Iris has been doing for a while. I think Elbaz did it quite well, although it's not necessarily as instantly desirable as Iris. It doesn't have that instant couture hit, whereas I think Elbaz is using the couture in the sense of the craft, which is something that I think happened quite a lot this season, particularly with Sterling Ruby. A lot of brands are kind of looking to couture rather than this fantasy sense, but more in it's couture because of the incredible craft that's gone behind it. What do you think?
Well, there's an attempt of rewriting the semantics of couture. That's natural and obvious in an ever-evolving world. We are on month 12 or year first of, a pandemic, for lack of a better word. It's definitely a crisis which changes everything. The interpretation of couture could be clearly, from Iris' perspective, a scientific evolvement of materials into a highly crafted, incredibly beautiful dress, or it could be the mere use of technology to improve adaptability of fabrics and shapes to a wider and more inclusive body shape range than before. Gone are the years where you needed to be, an extremely tall, slim, pale woman to be able to afford a dress in one of those beautiful dresses. I personally have an admiration and an incredibly human sympathy for Albert. And I was intrigued about the new project and how a master of craft and also sexiness, if I may, was able to reinvent the concept of couture. The product itself obviously stands on a different, side of the spectrum of couture from Iris. However, I understand the effort, I understand the messaging behind. Rightly so, Sterling Ruby, another artist which I'm extremely passionate about, and I had the pleasure to work with in the past. I mean, his presence in the Couture Week opens the definition of couture to single manufactured atelier, studio produced garments. Clearly, the aesthetic couldn't be further away from what we define as couture. But again, it's offer a different angle, the one-of-a-kind process or the unique, one-off piece as being a unique opportunity of purchase. It's correct, it's right, at the point in time where we are, that every rule is up for a rewriting or rewiring, every system is up for a rewiring, and that even couture, the most traditional component of the fashion industry, is up for debate. Having said that, Georgie, I must stay firm on the dreamy contribution of couture to our industry. Everything needs to stay the same, so everything can change. They were used to say in a beautiful movie, as you might recall. However, I think that for once, couture could be that little niche where unachievable images could inspire people. Democratization of couture is certainly understandable, and the wider industry needs to work strongly towards more inclusivity and more democratization in general. However, I wouldn't try to remove, in the attempt of widening the scope of couture, I wouldn't try to dilute the messaging, because in all honesty, we need something to look forward. I mean, we know that couture collectors may be glamorous women who unfortunately have little parties or events to go to at the moment, but most importantly, museums. And most of these creators are building human sculptures and selling and representing them through museums. So I wouldn't try to let that go in order to change the couture, background, if it makes sense.
It does make sense. I think it's interesting that you mentioned this kind of fantasy and dreaminess, because before couture started, that's what I was thinking couture would be. And obviously, to some extent, Dior will never not be a cinematic fantasy. Chanel will always have some kind of traditional element. But I was expecting a lot more kind of dreamy fantasy escapism, and actually what we had was modernity and menswear at Fendi and Valentino and huge shoes. And I'm in two sides, because I totally agree with you. I think the idea of inclusivity and democratization is really important, and actually that's something that there's a brand called Area, who are New York based, who creates these amazing couture pieces, and their whole spiel is trying to create couture without the snootiness, without the whole fluff and frills that come with it, so that you can have made to order pieces without the difficulty of going through the couture channels, which I totally empathize with and understand and celebrate. But I do relate to what you're saying about the museum factor. And I think that's where Sterling Ruby and Iris succeed, is because they're getting this balance between future forward thinking couture, creating something that is modern art pieces, thinking of something through a forward lens, but also catering to this dreaminess, this escapism, this fantasy that we all love to see and love to watch. I must say I was a little surprised that Kim Jones's debut at Fendi wasn't more in the Sterling Ruby camp. It was slightly more in the Chanel Dior camp than I would have hoped, because he's on paper a master of bringing in newness, freshness, collaborations, finger on the pulse energy. And to me, the kind of Bloomsbury Borghese energy was a little bit too old school couture. So I think there's an interesting play of couture going on this season, but it's interesting that you say we want to keep this kind of equilibrium of both ideas. It's quite a difficult thing to achieve, I think.
Listen, in an industry which has done still too little, but quite a lot of step forwards in the right direction, it is inappropriate to have a 0.1% of the industry dedicated to an escapism. Escapism is probably the right definition. I mean, we all are confined in places, isolating, and everywhere around the world we miss interaction with people. We are not traveling. I mean, we in the industry, we've been probably over traveling and over stressed about constant movement from one city to the other. We need a place where our dreams are still confined and ring-fenced. And I believe that place is probably couture, or it's appropriately couture. My personal interpretation of it is the one of unachievable, achievable, something you can look at as something at some point you could reach, but it will be a lot of hard work. It still is, in my opinion, the triumph of the atelier craftsmen and craftwomen in old cities, most likely. And it is about hours and hours and hours of high quality work and skilled work into a single garment. Modernism, or a new approach to couture, which I, by the way, would have expected from Kim as well. It's something which could be a one season, or in my perspective, one season trend, as long as it doesn't divert from the hard work required to produce the piece of art. Comparing sterling and iris is definitely a good point, Georgie. Sterling approach from a museum like the human sculpture with the dyeing and all the processes is doing to his art, and as much as his clothing, but it isn't couture as my definition of dreamy couture is. And I don't want to sound too conservative, because I'm certainly not. In the 99.9% of cases, as you probably know, I try to like the idea of moving fast, break things, and rewriting the rules. But that little corner of paradise probably needs to elevate all the rest of the industry and be an inspiration to all of us.
Absolutely. I think that's quite an interesting point, because I totally agree. Dreaminess and that corner of paradise, as you put it so well, is essential, particularly now. But I wonder if this change of couture is just a knee-jerk reaction to how we're feeling at the moment, and whether it will be something that continues. Because the Federation reached out to Sterling and asked if he would like to, which is quite incredible in itself. And, you know, says something about how couture is changing if the Federation, which is normally kind of Fort Knox on inviting brands in, is inviting Sterling. I think that's quite an interesting point, that things might be changing. But my gut reaction is that this is probably a knee-jerk reaction to the times we're in now, trying to create something fresh, trying to create something new, not necessarily in the camp of Sterling and Iris, because I think both of them have been quite true to their brand ethos, to what they stand for. But in the terms of maybe Valentino, for example, still beautiful, still striking, but completely new, completely wiping a slate clean. And I think in that case, it feels a bit like a lot of the couturiers and ateliers and brands are trying to carve out something new, because maybe even Dreamy and Fantasy isn't cutting it anymore. It's been such a difficult year. We need some kind of massive change.
So first and foremost, I sympathize enormously with the chairmen of the fashion councils around the world, and their difficulty and ability to keep the interest going on digital events as opposite to physical events. Couture, again, I mean, there's a very practical issue. Couture is not even a business; it's a form of art which is dedicated to the 0.1% of the population, and to, again, collectors and museums. Without the ability of leaving your house, you really don't have the ability neither to go to the museum, neither to utilize that beautiful piece of art, actually, as a garment. So newness was needed to keep the story alive. And I think it was a brilliant idea from Pascal Morin to invite Sterling and Ruby as part of the couture. I tend to believe this is a reaction to the moment, and I tend to hope this is a moment and not a new normal, obviously. I kind of think that we are in front of a bifurcation. It's either you take a total new direction to the couture, so we'll see more of that, more of the one piece or science meets magic into product to become the new couture, or we'll go back to highly crafted, long working hours and super, selected couture. I'm not saying that one or the other is better. I'm just saying that when fighting for a revolution in the industry, I don't feel the urgency to change everything. I'll be very happy to improve the 99.9% and totally comfortable to leave the 0.1% again as untouched. I might be romantic about it, but that's, I grew up dreaming about seeing a couture show in Paris. And when the first time I did, it was mind blowing. But I was mostly impressed by the garment itself rather than the surrounding energy.
Yeah, which is very telling. Just before we go, do you think now that couture is kind of entering a slightly more modern, approachable vibe, that ready to wear will start introducing slightly more couture made to order elements? Do you think they work hand in hand, or they're completely separate entities and forever they will stay?
It's a very good question. Couture historically has served the purpose of inspiring ready to wear in the seasons following the couture fashion shows. I believe the immediate still is for the ready to wear really about casual dressing out of lack of purpose and opportunity to show up. We know that things changes quite dramatically when conditions change. So we are all hoping here for the roaring 20s, dressing up and getting out until late nights. So that at the roaring 20s moment, which will come, we will see more couture-ish element or demi-couture element in the high-hand ready to wear. So that's certainly a fact. If I may, a last piece, just very personal. In this ever-changing scene of the couture week, I would have loved to see Raf Simons performing. I still have the memory of, one of those iconic looks in his debut for Dior. I think 48 or 49, large, beautiful gown and tight black shirt on a t-shirt on top. That will have been played very, very well with the chain of couture and probably bridge the gap between couture, handcraft, and modern vision of it.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a very, very good point. I would have very much liked to see that as well. Fingers, toes crossed for next time. Maybe
Yeah. You never know.
You never know. Well, thank you so much for chatting with me, Stefano. It was great to pick your brain, and I feel a lot wiser and smarter at the end of this conversation.
Thank you very much. You're very kind.
I'll see you soon.
Bye.